Thank you very much, and thank you for IFPRI for inviting us here. And if I can take a minute before my 5-minute start to okay, yeah, to congratulate IFPRI on undertaking this project, this book, which I think has been is extremely important in terms of the increase of the knowledge of these particularly rather arcane things, which I think is not just a question of understanding some domestic policies of some developed countries, as I'll indicate in a minute. I think has a much broader context. In fact, I'm going to start with Clayton's view of what was happening in the 70s and the 80s, and sort of project it forward. And I think the paradigm shift, if you like, in agricultural policy, in agricultural trade policy, has been this move to a new model with moderate tariffs, no export subsidies, strictly constrained domestic support, but nevertheless large enough to allow provision of public goods, and also for developing countries to avoid impediments to the development process. Implicitly, this becomes a sort of framework for a sort of global agricultural policy, if that's putting it a little bit grandly, but basically a framework in which national agricultural policies can operate without negative effects on the trade system. And this, I think, is now much more obvious than it was perhaps when Clayton was first negotiating in the Uruguay round, where it seemed to us, or seemed to everyone, that resolving the disputes between the US and the EU was the key thing. That if they got their act together, then everything was fine. Now I think the context is very different, and David mentioned India and could have gone on and mentioned China, where, as we point out in the book, this is where a lot of the flexibility in the future is going to be. If Doha really comes to an end the way it's anticipated, then there will be a fairly strict ceiling on price distorting, or trade distorting support measures in US, Europe, and Japan. So I think we are, it is useful to sort of project this forward in a multi-country world. And this requires the notion of a sort of point of convergence and a path towards convergence, although obviously this could take many decades in view of the many actors other than just the OECD countries that will be involved. But I think it is seriously time to think about, do we want to move towards zero trade distorting support and so on, and try and get China and India and other countries to focus on that, to agree on that as a sort of path towards some aim. Well, okay, this is the longer term picture, and I just suggest that we should see the numbers in the book and the discussion in the book as being part of that. But I think in the more immediate term, we need a starting point, and the starting point has to be greater transparency and a meaningful monitoring of domestic market. And there's been some discussion in Geneva recently about what can be rescued in 2011 from the Doha package, and I would go along with those, such as IPC, that have argued that in fact the monitoring and notification process, which is in a perhaps not too strong a way, but it's in the Doha agreement, could be brought out as one of the things for the Doha Light, the early harvest. So I think we have to establish prompt annual notifications, and we have to recognize the fact that other institutions are doing this. OECD regularly brings out notifications. They're not the same. We talk about the differences in the book, and most of you know the differences, but nevertheless they all use the same data. and there's really no reason why there should be a 6-year lag between something coming out in the WTO and something that's been published by the OECD. And OECD are moving towards non-OECD countries in terms of their calculations. We should agree on accurate and meaningful definition of terms like applied administrative price, the eligible quantities, and so on. And I think we should think about updating the reference prices. Now, as Lars pointed out to me when I suggested this recently, there are some countries that would, if you updated the reference prices, would actually have more scope for market price support. So I think one has to be a little careful there, but nevertheless, the notion of having the reference prices may be tied to a moving average in the past, I think is worth considering. I think we need to consider separate disciplines on market price support and non-exempt direct payments. And the reason for this, I think, is because, not because they're totally different, but because MPS is artificial, and therefore, in some sense, you know, the way we've described it, the way David put it on the slides. And so it seems to me that adding together an artificial and a real construct and constraining them both is not the best way of constraining the trade distorting element there. The other side of the coin, of course, is the green box, and David Blanford, I think, mentioned the green box. We've got to tighten up the disciplines on the green box, because the green box and the amber box are the sort of, you know, one slips over into the other and so on, and then you discuss the difference between them. And it seems to me that something that the Cairns Group have been pushing for some time, separating the direct payments on the one hand from public goods provision on the other, might be something that you could do within the context of the green box. And then I think a last point that we make is that we should consider notification of demand increasing subsidies, including things like the biofuels program, but also resource idling programs such as the CRP, because if we're moving into a situation of firm and high world prices and price spikes, then it seems to me that these are important aspects of domestic policy, and I see no reason why these shouldn't be monitored very much in the same way as the production increasing subsidies are. Thank you.